Now let's move on and think about after imprisonment, which obviously still involves the criminal legal system. You may be on parole from the prison system, parole meaning a suspended sentence you get coming out of prison, as opposed to probation is the sentence that they suspend in court, which means you avoid going to jail in the first place. So there's a difference between, a suspended sentence coming from prison, which is called parole, versus a suspended sentence at your, at the end of your trial at sentencing, which is probation. But both involve people in the system, right? Correctional officers, parole officers, etc. So you have to deal with some of those issues. If you, for example, were a young kid and you sent, maybe just playing around, sent a nasty picture to another person, or even a 1 year difference from the statutory law, maybe you're a 17-year-old and sent something to us, you could be liable for child pornography. And child pornography are some of the stiffest laws in the country. Some of the harshest laws in our country are anti-child pornography laws. But what does that mean for the 17-year-old who was just goofing around? It means a lifetime of registration. In some places, it means on your yard saying a sex offender lives here. Sometimes on your car, depends where you live, right? But there are all these markers that are trying to, show that this person is untrustable, or this person you need to watch out for is a sex offender. So there's that humiliation, right? That alienation that we tried to talk about before. In general, anybody who has an F, that fire, that felony on your record, you have a world of trouble coming ahead of you just by having a felony on your record. So we can talk about what some of those things are, but really we're talking about how scarlet letters work in the present. This is a scarlet letter, right? You get asked, have you ever been convicted? You gotta freaking check that box, right? That means you just didn't get the job practically. And so having to deal with the scarlet letter and being excluded by that, we also have what are called legal financial obligations that attend, which mean they're called LFOs, legal financial obligations. And so you could have a situation where between restitution and other fees and costs, someone convicted of a crime could be going down for maybe 5 years and owe like $40,000. And in some jurisdictions, you start getting charged interest on the day of conviction, right? The day of sentencing. When you're sentenced, you start accumulating interest. In some places in Washington State and I believe Arizona, it was like 12%. So you had people going into prison with $40,000 debt coming out, worse than your education loans. They're owing like $80,000, $90,000 in debt. And of course, people who come out of prison are the least employable people. They take on jobs that have the highest turnover rate. And so the thought that they're ever going to make enough money to pay off that debt, it's almost like, sort of fantasy thinking, because they're never going to be able to pay off that debt in many instances. So we have this legal financial obligation system that can keep someone in a type of financial indentured servitude or something like that to the state, right? You owe money to the state. It keeps compounding interest and you're never going to get out of it. It's like a type of financial slavery that comes from being a felon and having spent time in prison. Lastly, a part of these consequences that attend someone who's been convicted of a crime are all of these things that we call collateral consequences. A collateral consequence is a civil law. It's a civil law, not a criminal law, that is triggered by a conviction. So even if you plead guilty and you have a plea bargain, or you're convicted before a jury in trial, both are the same. You get a conviction on your record. And because now you have a felony, for example, a whole bunch of other civil laws kick in. They're triggered by your conviction. And that's what's known as collateral consequences. And so this could mean you get deported, collateral consequence. Certain student loans you're not going to be able to apply for. Certain licenses. At the federal level, federal legislation says that if you're convicted of a felony, you can't have certain licenses, for example. You can't get a broadcast license. You can't get a license to drive an airplane, for example, right? So these kinds of rules that are out there, you can't live in certain places, or you can't get certain types of housing welfare. And then, of course, as we mentioned, there's that terrible box, right? Have you been convicted of a crime? Or, you know, asking for your criminal background and history, registered sex offender. You can't vote in many jurisdictions, right? At last count, it was almost like 6 million Americans can't vote just because they've been convicted of a crime. But then you ask, well, did the crime involve voting or something with the election? No, just everybody gets disenfranchised, which to me is very interesting in a country that really, you know, sort of prides itself on democracy being the backbone. But in this country, you can lose the right to vote very quickly. And the people who are losing the right to vote are people who have historically had a hell of a time trying to vote, right? So this is one of the most effective ways of keeping people from voting, is to tie a criminal conviction to it. And then, of course, this may be the only benefit of a conviction, is just like not having to go to jury duty, but that's also, but it is really, it's very nefarious. And you know, another thing is that you may think it's strange, but for all this talk about the Second Amendment in this country, if you're convicted of a felony, I don't care what the felony is. It could be I'm from, coming from Texas, and, you could have, ridiculous things that get you a felony. In Massachusetts, you can have a firearm, and because you don't have an ID card for it, firearm's legal, but the fact you don't have an ID card, felony, means you can never possess a firearm for the rest of your life. You can't rectify that with the state because it's a federal law. So even if you committed a state felony, the federal law kicks in, because if it says if you've committed any state or federal felony, you no longer can have a gun for the rest of your life. Right? Those are some of the things. Now, we laugh when we say the jury duty, you get alleviated from that responsibility, but try to think about what this really means, because I think it's important. Because we're talking about rights and we're talking about human rights, but let's break this down for a second, because we're talking about disenfranchising people from participating in the system that we want to integrate them to. We want to integrate them to our system. Okay, so don't let them vote and kick them out of the political process. Not very great idea, but there's more pragmatic critiques of this. And here's what I'm trying to get at, is that we have judges, lawyers, and legislators who write really long penalties for crimes in this country, such that, 25 to life is a pretty normative proposition. We have 3 strikes legislation in many jurisdictions federally. And so we don't have a problem with putting someone away for life. So we have these legislators and we have these judges who are creating these laws, adjudicating them, and then sentencing these people for huge amounts of time. Now, let's ask the question, how many of any of those people have spent one night in a prison? Oh, cut the dumps, let's just say a jail. How many of them have ever spent one night in a jail, the very place that they're sending people to for these ungodly amounts of time? And talking about hemispherical justice, we dole out the harshest sentences in the world. We have no business pointing to North Korea, Iran, or anywhere else in the world, when in this country, we're laying it thick on people we convict of crimes. And so those people know very little about the internal workings of the punishment system, but they're making all the rules and determining who goes there. Meanwhile, the people who come out of prison, who know the most about how the system works and how corrupt it is and how dangerous and abusive it is, we silence them. Can't change the political process, the laws, the policies, and you can't prevent the state from taking one of your fellow brethren and sistren to jail either. So we disenfranchise people who know some of the most stuff about the criminal legal system, and we give all the power to judges and lawyers and legislators. And so to me, that's like upside down policy. If you think about it, we got it backwards. We should be allowing people who know to have a voice, but that's where we are in our system. Well, I'm going to stop here and say thank you very much for your time and attention. I usually get a lot of yawns in the it's like fish kind of bubbling up, but I didn't get too many. So thank you very much for that. I look forward to your comments and your questions, anything, really. Thank you.